All right, so this is 121, Computer Forensics, and we're up to Module 4, so let me bring that up. It's here, Canvas. Let me turn on a fan to cool my computer. All right. Often needs that or it starts acting funny. And the streaming puts a burden on it. So, if I look at modules, all right, here's the module 4, and something bad happened. Okay. This thing is moving slow. I guess there's a slowdown at Canvas. It's not just my local system. But anyway, seems to work well enough. All right, so there are forensic groups that have decided what you should have to equip your lab. And here's one of them, the American Society of Crime Laboratory Detectors. And there are other ones like the Scientific Working Group on Digital Evidence. And they all pretty much agree on things you should have. So here's some terms to consider. Your private labs are consultants that help companies research fraud and other security problems. Big companies have their own forensic practitioners. Small companies have to outsource this. I know DriveSaver is a local company, one of the many companies that does this. All right, and so there's different situations under which you need to collect electronic evidence. One of the big ones is e-discovery, rapidly growing. One of my students got involved in this and hired a bunch of other students after him, and it's a really big field. Because when everybody's getting sued right and left in America, it's huge, and every time you get sued, there will be a discovery order from a judge saying you must hand over all the evidence about this issue. It'd be like when Google got sued by Oracle. They said for the past 5 or 7 years, we need every document pertaining to your development of Android and how you used Oracle software in Android. And so then they have to do a search through all their computer systems and backup tapes and everything to find every email, every PDF, every spreadsheet, everything that matches certain criteria. And that's a big job, and that's for e-discovery. So you're going to court. A plaintiff is the person complaining, saying something bad has happened to them and seeking some relief, typically money. And they can request electronically stored information, email, Word documents, and so on. Now, Sarbanes-Oxley is an act passed that requires all publicly traded companies to retain electronic information for a period of time so it'll be available for inspection. It depends on your industry. If you do business in Europe, you now have to obey the General Data Protection Regulation, which has another bunch of requirements of how you handle personal data. And the Securities and Exchange Commission can also demand documents from you to examine how you're handling your financial affairs at a company. If you're publicly traded, which means if you sell stock. If you sell stock, then they investigate issues of insider trading and issues of improper financial disclosure, where you are lying about your company, and this is what Elon Musk got in trouble with many times, by making outrageous and false statements on Twitter about the financial status of Tesla, like claiming that Tesla was going to go private and he already had a buyer, which was false, and quoting a number about the price, which was false, and he got in a lot of trouble with the Securities and Exchange Commission for doing that. In fact, had to step down, I think, as the CEO, or technically he's not the CEO anymore, and promised to have lawyers review all his tweets before tweeting, which he flagrantly stopped doing and continued to just violate it, and nothing much happened, which is why some people are afraid, like a student brought up right at the start, that maybe he can just ignore his contract with Twitter too. This is a problem with the corruption, a legal process in America. Very wealthy and powerful people like Donald Trump and Elon Musk seem to be able to break the law and have no punishment. And if you have too much of that happening, then you become a very corrupt society. So hopefully we will see some consequences for some of these wealthy people's flagrantly breaking the law. Anyway, so an evidence acquisition lab will collect data from evidence from original devices. This is typically a fairly routine process, but you do have to be careful. You record all the data from a machine and save it on another device and take it away. And then you have to preserve the original device as evidence typically. And you have to record everything you did and sign a chain of custody form to make sure that you know it all. So you got email, of course. You do an inventory of devices. And you may have complicated information management systems to deal with, although I think what they're talking about here is just how you organize the data you catch. I know the FBI uses a central server in the cloud, and probably a private cloud, so that the person who goes to a crime scene and gathers evidence, the labs will take the evidence, they'll just put it on a server, and then the remote FBI agents will just run FTK on the cloud image to analyze and read through all the emails and everything and research the case. Right, and like I say, web hosting is often a good way to distribute the case to your people, the people that need it, which is plaintiff and defense counsels, and then their forensic experts who will be examining the evidence. So you got to have various things in a laboratory. This is the kind of thing you might have. You have a closet for equipment. You have a locking closet to store evidence. The original hard drives you're copying from and cell phones and everything have to be locked up because you have to go to court and swear on the chain of custody, I received this at this time on this date and I secured it. So nobody would mess with it until I handed it over to this person. That's what you must have. Otherwise, it will be degraded as evidence in court because you will not have testimony to say that nobody modified it. And so you have workstations, one for PC and one for Mac is typical, and a workbench for taking apart things and working sort of thing. And there's a lot of equipment in here. So your workstations should be password protected. They say multi-factor authentication. That's not a bad idea. I don't know if everybody does that, but it's not a bad idea. And they have to be very powerful if you're going to be efficient. In general, human skill is far more expensive than equipment. This is why most corporations that make money, they buy good computers for their workers because wasting their time is more expensive than paying for the computers. There's something called a Fred workstation, a relatively expensive workstation just for forensics, which is something you might want to get, although you can do it with any reasonably powerful computer. The main thing you need, you got a workbench with rubber mats, you can handle static electricity, and you're going to have enough lighting to safely dismantle computers and, of course, be able to photograph the evidence you find there. And a mobile device examination workbench is another thing. You may have to do soldering with microscopes and have a lot of tools to take apart cell phones and other mobile devices. So here's some example of the hardware you can get. Cellebrite sells special hardware just to image, I think, cell phones. Gray Key will unlock iPhones, but only sell it to law enforcement. There's a lot of other companies that sell these. I know Parabon sells these bags to store your cell phones, and in Faraday bags that block radio signals so they won't receive messages or remote wipe commands on the way to your investigation. Blackbag sells software, uses for iOS and Mac OS, and so does Oxygen and Cellebrite. These are the kind of software you might need for mobile devices. And for your field kit, which is what you would go to a crime scene and image things on site, which of course is a smaller, more portable kit, and things that are too complicated to do on site, you would just seize the whole equipment and take it back to the lab where you're going to take it apart and do what has to be done. So if you're going to go into the lab, you want a bunch of hard drives with a lot of storage that have already been sanitized, which means you've made sure that there's no data on them, they've been erased. Powerful laptop, and you might want a Cellebrite device to collect data from cell phones. Very common Faraday bags to put things in. All right, and for software, here's one recommendation. X-Ways is one of the many forensics gathering software. All right, and they talk about a mouse jiggler. I was not aware of this. A mouse jiggler just to jiggle the mouse to stop something from going to sleep. I'm not entirely sure why you would need that, but I guess there might be some case in which you'd want it. And then, of course, forms, evidence bags, which can be just even paper or plastic bags. They typically are just something which you can seal with a tamper-evident tape or something, so you can have, say, that you're sure nobody messes with it between seizing it and taking it back to get locked in an evidence safe. Kit to take apart computers with tools and such, and a camera, of course. All right. So a Faraday bag is just a bag with metal in the plastic around it so that it will block radio signals. A Faraday room is a whole room covered with a sort of wire mesh so that radio signals cannot get in or out. And you can also have a Faraday box, which you reach into with gloves, and there's just a box that's the same thing. These are all useful to make sure when analyzing devices that no radio signals reach that device. And an evidence locker, of course, is just a secure place to lock up your stuff. Many people use safes. You just have to be able to testify in court that you are sure that nobody messed with it. All right, cabinets and such. So you can clone hard drives with just software on a machine, but that is only for amateurs. Professionals always use hardware write blockers because it's just more reliable. In principle, you can have software on a Linux workstation, and to some extent even on a Windows workstation, although it's difficult, that blocks write operations, but you might forget to turn it on. It might be complicated. In practice, it's just a lot better to use a hardware write blocker, and that's what these are. So you have cloning devices with write blockers, and they often do the whole cloning, so they cost about $300, and you plug in a drive, and it will read the drive without writing anything to the drive. And there are disk duplicators that don't even have a computer. They just copy this disk to that disk and include a write blocker, and you just sort of turn it on and let it go, which is nice, even more automatic. Then you might need SIM card readers. Right, you're going to need drives to put things on, and toolkits, of course, to get inside the cases and take apart all the different computers and phones and everything else you're going to come across. So flashlights and cameras, and there's an example of an evidence bag. It can even just be paper. The point is not to prevent people from getting in. The point is to make it so they have to tear something to get in, so you know if they went in. So you can say, I brought the stuff back to the lab, I looked at the bag, and the bag had not been opened because it was tamper evident, and then I put it in evidence safe. So you can say, I maintained the chain of custody. And so when you're recording things, you need to record their serial number, what kind of cables are connected, and all that jazz when you're collecting evidence, so that you can reconstruct it, and so you know what device was connected to what device, and so on. So you use software, bitstream imaging software. We've talked about this. A lot of software can do this, like Encase, FTK Imager. We're using Autopsy, which used to be called SleuthKit and Autopsy. All right. And virtual machines are increasingly important these days. You might need virtual machines to test malware, and you might have evidence on virtual machines. The servers or workstations you're working on might in fact be virtual, and then the virtual machine image will be the forensic image you take. And you got antivirus and password cracking. You often have to defeat passwords or encryption to get into encrypted files or folders. Now, for photos, there are various photo formats in use. The other formats people use are GIF, PNG, and bitmap, and RAW, but the most common one is JPEG, and JPEGs are very nice because they are technically called JFIF format, and they often include extra metadata in the image, like the latitude, longitude, and time the photograph was taken, the name of the photographer, the model number, serial number of the camera, and all sorts of good stuff, which can be extremely helpful. It's also very easy to collect. There are a bunch of tools that can do it. Autopsy can do it. You can even just open them in a text editor, because all that metadata is just written in plain text added to the file. As the rest of the image is binary data, but this metadata is just strings right there in the image, easily extracted. All right. And so, by the way, there are tools, Adroit Forensics is one of them, that will carve data in the remnants of old files left on the drive, so you can reconstruct deleted photos. And as you've seen, Autopsy can do this too. All forensic software can do this. Some of it's better than others. Most forensic software that people use actually does an incredibly simple thing. It just looks for the header of an image, which is like FFD8 for a JPEG, and the footer, which is FFD9, and it just assumes that it's contiguous. All the blocks from the start to the end are there, and it makes the image out of that. Now, as you probably know, if you fill up a hard drive and then delete some files and store some more files, it becomes fragmented. So you might save an image and it might have several clusters here and then the rest of it stored in clusters far away. So if that happens and you reconstruct that deleted file, you'll get a garbled image with part of the image and then junk in the middle and another part of the image. Or maybe you only get a fraction of the image. So there are some software products that actually do a more detailed job of reconstructing images, but the examiners I've heard talk about this say in practice it hardly matters. And so the major tools like FTK and CASE and Autopsy have been told they just do it the simple way, and that's good enough. The couple of tools that tried to sell tools just to thoroughly and more accurately reconstruct the images didn't really sell because it wasn't really important enough to justify the price of the tool. All right, so you're going to need energy, and a UPS is a good idea so that you don't have everything shut down when the power goes out. And of course, fire safety, and it costs a lot. A lot of this forensic equipment and safety and tools and everything gets pretty expensive, which is why you charge a lot of money. I've heard years ago one of my trainers said you should charge at least $800 an hour to image hard drives. And forensics is expensive. Lawsuits are expensive. Attorneys are expensive. So it's not a cheap thing. You can do it on the cheap with open source software and such, but even you're a professional doing it in large quantity, you get better equipment and you charge more. So you have to make sure that you can control who's going in the lab. You have a log of who goes in the lab, because of course, if you're not recording that and people can just wander into your lab and mess with the evidence, then of course that messes up your chain of custody. So you have to do background checks on employees and only let trusted people in the lab and have a log of who's gone in and out of the lab. And the same thing with your data. You're going to have data stored somewhere, and you have to make sure that nobody's been accessing that data because it is confidential, and you have to make sure they're not tampering with it. So physical security and so on, lab access. All right, so to extract your evidence, you should be familiar with the basic tools. DD is the main tool used to duplicate disks on Linux. It's the disk duplicator. It will just copy every bit from one disk to another, or from any object to another, like the memory image, if you can mount it as a drive, and so on. And there are other versions like DC3DD, which is just a digital forensics computer lab upgrade to DD, so it just does the same thing, but then it stores the hash values as well. And grep is a tool that searches through any file for strings. So you could look for a string to see if it's there. You can even search through a binary file for readable strings. All right. Anyway, so in financial fraud, you might need to know a bit about how credit card numbers work. There are different categories, major industry identifier, different types of credit card numbers, and the digits in a credit card number. There's also a pattern for the digits on checks and bank accounts. A good thing to know. Here's the number found on checks. This is the American Bankers Association number, and so on. And of course, there's skimmers. If you read Brian Krebs' stuff, a famous cybersecurity researcher, he is very big expert on skimmers. There are many articles about skimmers. These are devices that criminals attach to ATM machines to make an unauthorized copy of your credit card when you go through. See, grep, fgrep, and egrep. Well, grep is the only one I've used. fgrep and egrep. Egrep I've used a little bit. Egrep is the extended one with more complicated regular expressions allowed. And I don't remember what fgrep is. Let's take a look. What's fgrep? Is used to search for fixed character strings in a file. I don't know what a fixed character is compared to something else. Just another way. Examples. Fgrep using. Looks like it's the same thing as grep to me. I don't immediately understand why fgrep is different than normal grep. I know egrep lets you have more complicated extended regular expressions. And regular expressions are a whole field in themselves. So here it's going to look for this using .g, looking for that string. But I usually use grep just to look for simple strings like a password or something. You can match a string, or you can make a complicated expression. Like you could look for a pattern of text that matches a social security number, like number dash number dash number. You can make patterns like that, and they can get very complicated. But I've only used simple greps myself. Anyway, so there's these different devices like the Parasite. This is a device that'll compromise the terminal and capture the data. It can be Bluetooth enabled. And often, so the basic idea is they somehow attach this thing to your ATM machine. When you slide in your card, it makes an extra copy of the magnetic stripe, and somewhere around here, either part of the device or nearby, there's a camera hidden, which records you typing in the PIN. So they get the magnetic stripe and the PIN. As far as I know, there are none of these getting the other data that you get from the chip part yet. But they get very clever, and they don't happen all that often, but once you become aware of them, it's a thing to know. All right, and another issue they mention here is steganography. You can have extra data hidden in the files you pick up. You can hide text in an image. You can hide any small amount of data in any large file. And you hide it by making small changes in the colors of an image or any other small binary change that won't make an obvious change in how it looks. There can be extra data hidden in there. And this is used by terrorists and spies. I know the spy Anna Chapman used it in Washington. She went to Washington and started seducing politicians and military leaders to get secrets for Russia, and they caught her. And so when she knew the cops were coming, she fled back to Russia, where she's a big celebrity as a spy and an underwear model. And she left her computer behind, and they found her steganography software on her computer. So they were able to figure out how it worked from that. In practice, I don't know anybody that's actually seen steganography in an ordinary criminal case. It seems to be, like say, only used by national security threats like spies and terrorists, as far as I know. But in principle, it could be used to hide data in an image in almost any way. And the only way to really detect it that I know, there are some tools that will look for standard program steganography in case they used a standard program. But other than that, the only way to do it is to somehow get a copy of the unaltered image and compare it to the altered image, and then try to figure out what the difference is. Anyway, the point of that's a covert channel. If you hide data in an image, you've done something more than encryption. Encryption is like HTTPS, where you send your password to Google, and anybody can see, if they have access to the network traffic, that you're sending some data to Google, but they can't see what you're sending because they don't have the encryption key. But in steganography, you send a message by like posting an image of a cat like on a Pinterest or something, and nobody knows that it has a second image. So that's a covert channel. You're sending data, and nobody even knows that you are sending a message. So it's another level of secrecy. Anyway, that's it for the chapter. Let's try a Kahoot. I should have a mod for Kahoot. All right. Yes, you can hide any file inside another. You could hide audio inside an image, or a low resolution image inside a high resolution image. Yeah, any kind of data could be inside any other kind of data. Well, I'll give it a few more seconds. Okay, looks like I better wait a little more. All right. All right. So what's the U.S. law requiring companies to preserve information? The Sarbanes-Oxley law, which I think is named after the legislators that made the law, but that's what requires companies to preserve data. All right, what's the hardware device that you can only get if you are law enforcement? That's gray key. Good. All right. All right. Which one of these is essential? Yeah, the right blocker is what you really need. The rest of these are desirable but not necessary, but you must have right blockers to gather evidence. All right. All right, what's the Linux tool that extracts evidence from a device? Yep, that's DD, disk duplicator. All right. Well, they have to tell me who they are if they want their points. CyberSom. DLR, those look like real initials. That's probably good enough. And Powman will also have to tell me who they are if they want points. But I've recorded your pseudonym anyway. All right, let me stop this recording.